Why did silence feel louder than command? The rain hadn't stopped for hours and the ground had turned to mud, thick, clinging, merciless. The kind that swallowed boot prints whole as if erasing proof that anyone had ever stood there. To the cadets of West Point's elite gauntlet exercise, it was another trial. To the woman standing quietly at the tree line, it was something else entirely. A memory. A rhythm she'd known before. The smell of wet soil, the metallic sting of tension in the air, these were not obstacles to her. They were home. Anna Reed didn't look like anyone who belonged here. No rank, no insignia, no posture of command. Just a plain black rain shell, khaki cargo pants, and a small weather-beaten day pack. She stood still, unmoved by the drizzle that turned to sheets, watching the young men and women struggle to build their one-rope bridge over the ravine. Their commander, Cadet Captain Marcus Evans, barked orders with the sharp authority of someone who believed leadership was volume. His voice cracked against the wind. "Come on, Miller," tensioned that line. "No slack, this isn't a camping trip." The cadets obeyed, hands trembling from cold and fatigue, faces smeared with streaks of mud and paint. Their movements had lost precision. The gauntlet was meant to push them past endurance, but arrogance and exhaustion had begun to blur into the same thing. Evans mistook both for control. Then he saw her, standing in the mist at the edge of the clearing, half obscured by pine shadows. "Honestly," he called out, his tone soaked in the easy arrogance of youth, "what's a civilian doing out here? This is a closed evaluation. Go back to the observation tent before you get your pretty little hiking boots dirty." A few cadets laughed nervously, not because it was funny, but because that's what people do when they don't know which way the wind is about to turn. Anna didn't move, didn't answer. Her eyes gray, steady, patient, didn't even acknowledge him. She kept watching the bridge. The rope swayed slightly in the wind, tension building against the pitons embedded in the shale. To anyone else it looked stable enough. To her it looked like failure waiting for permission. From a distant observation post, Admiral Vance watched through a rain-streaked monitor. He had seen thousands of soldiers and cadets move under stress, but never quite like her. The stillness wasn't ignorance, it was calibration. A kind of readiness that came from years of knowing exactly when to move and when not to. Her weight distribution, the set of her shoulders, even her breathing, it all spoke of a balance that couldn't be taught in a classroom. He leaned forward, lips pressing into a thin line. He recognized the stance. It belonged to someone who'd once carried a rifle into places that didn't officially exist. But the cadets didn't see that. They saw only what Evans told them to see, a civilian intruding on their test. Anna's gaze drifted briefly to him, one quiet second, a glance without hostility, almost clinical curiosity, then back to the bridge. Her silence wasn't defiance, it was assessment. The rope sagged more than it should have. The left side piton, set too shallow, was already straining. Evans, too focused on performing leadership, didn't see it. None of them did. The rain grew harder. Drops hissed against nylon and metal. The sound built until it became a low, constant roar. Evans straightened his back, forcing composure, his pride inflating against the cold. "Let's get this done," he shouted. "The brass is watching, let's show them how it's done." They moved faster now, hands fumbling with knots, their attention scattered by fatigue and the unspoken need to impress. Every motion louder, sloppier. Every order meant to cover fear. They missed the fraying line on the far end. They missed the way the wet shale had started to crumble under the primary anchor. Anna missed nothing. The drizzle turned to a curtain of rain, and the air thickened with that charged heaviness that comes before something breaks. She stayed rooted in place, watching. Her fingers twitched once, almost involuntarily, as if muscle memory whispered, "Move now." But she didn't, not yet. The rope bridge trembled. Evans stepped back, proud of what he saw. To him it was almost done. To her it was seconds away. Then, a crack. Sharp, metallic, like a rifle shot through fog. The left anchor tore free. Cadet Miller, who had been halfway across, dropped 10 feet in a blink. The line screamed under strain. His shout split the air, thin, panicked human. Hold the line, Evans yelled, but the command had no weight. The secondary anchor bent under pressure. Every rope on the bridge was now an instrument in a dying orchestra. Miller dangled 100 feet above a torrent of gray water and jagged stone. The bridge sagged dangerously. Every cadet froze. Procedures vanished. Instinct fractured into panic. They were soldiers in training, not soldiers yet. Evans's mouth opened, but no words came. He was supposed to lead. He was supposed to know what to do. But in that moment, all his knowledge felt small, shrinking against the sound of rain and terror. And through it all, Anna moved. Not running, not rushing, just moving. Fast, steady, efficient. She dropped her pack at the anchor point and unzipped it in one smooth motion. Its contents glimmered under the dim light. Specialized carabiners, titanium pulleys, ultralight rope coils, cordage only someone from another world would have. "Wait, what are you?" Evans started, but his voice cracked, drowned out by the storm. She didn't answer. Her hands worked like an old machine built for one purpose, to solve the unsolvable. Every motion was practiced, deliberate. The cadets stopped shouting. They just watched. Her silence was commanding in a way Evans's orders had never been. She anchored a new line, not to the failed piton, but to a massive oak rooted deep in the ground. Her fingers tied a series of knots no one recognized, movements too fast and fluid to follow. The knots looked less like knots and more like woven precision. She clipped a pulley into place, ran the rope through it, and redirected the tension. 90 seconds. That's all it took. 90 seconds of pure, silent mastery. And just like that, the groaning stopped. The system stabilized. Miller was still hanging, shivering, terrified, but alive. The load was now spread evenly across her makeshift rigging. The bridge, though broken, wouldn't fail completely. Evans's voice finally returned, cracked and unsure. "We need to pull him up. Get a Z-drag ready." No one moved. They were all looking at her, the civilian, the ghost. She didn't acknowledge him. She was already preparing another rope, this one thinner, smoother, coiled perfectly around her harness. "Stop," Evans shouted, panic seeping into command. "You're not authorized, you're a civilian." Anna didn't hear him, or maybe she did and simply didn't care. The sound of distant rotor blades cut through the storm, a low, thudding rhythm that didn't belong here. The cadets looked up. A Black Hawk helicopter, matte black, unmarked, slid out of the clouds like an apparition. The downwash bent the trees, whipped rain into spirals. Evans's breath caught. That wasn't an Academy aircraft. Anna looked up briefly. The figure leaning out of the helicopter's open door, helmeted, visor down, gave her a subtle thumbs up. She returned a small nod. No words, just recognition. And then she stepped backward off the edge. The cadets gasped. Evans stumbled forward. She walked down the cliff face, perfectly perpendicular to the rock wall, every step measured, deliberate. She moved like gravity was just another variable to negotiate. Rain hammered her face, rope hissed against metal. Her voice, calm and unwavering, floated up through the wind. "Miller, look at me, I've got you." She reached him in seconds, clipping herself to his harness. Her hands worked with the precision of a field surgeon. A cut here, a knot there. One clean motion, and she severed the failing rope holding him. For a heartbeat, they both dropped, swinging violently over the abyss. The cadet screamed. The helicopter's winch descended. She secured Miller first, always first, and then herself. The cable tightened, lifting them both out of the ravine in one smooth, steady arc. 10 minutes, from failure to extraction. When the helicopter disappeared into the storm, silence fell. The kind that isn't peaceful, just hollow. The cadets stood in the rain, staring at the wrecked bridge, the mud, the space where she had been. Their commander's voice, so loud before, was gone. Marcus Evans couldn't move, couldn't even look up. All his training, his pride, his command, all of it meant nothing next to what he had just witnessed. The woman he had mocked had walked into chaos and rewritten physics, without permission, without applause, without noise. When Admiral Vance arrived minutes later, the air itself seemed to tighten. His boots sank into the mud as he approached Evans. The Admiral didn't need to speak. The cadet's trembling posture said everything. He finally broke the silence. "Report, Cadet." Evans swallowed hard. His throat felt raw. "Sir, at approximately 1400 during bridge construction we experienced anchor failure. Cadet Miller was on the line. The situation became unstable." "Unstable," Vance repeated, the word a cold blade. "And then?" "Sir," a civilian observer intervened. Vance's gaze hardened. He turned to the major beside him. "Pull up the observer's file." The major's tablet glowed in the rain. Vance didn't look surprised when he read it. He only nodded once, grimly, then turned back to the cadets. "You want to know who you dismissed today?" he said quietly, his voice carrying like thunder. "You want to know what arrogance blinds you to?" The cadets didn't answer. "Her name is Anna Reed," he continued. "But that's not the name we knew her by. Last recorded rank Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, DVGRU, SEAL Team 6. The words hit like impact rounds. Evans felt his stomach drop. Around him, cadets froze, eyes wide. Vance's voice grew colder, deliberate. "She passed Bud S when women weren't supposed to. Top 5 of her class. 14 years of active duty. 12 deployments to environments so hostile the Pentagon still calls them non-permissive. You were worried about her getting her boots dirty. She spent half her life in mud that would kill you in a day." Silence again. Vance scrolled. "She's a master breacher, combat climber, field surgeon. The knot she used to save your teammate isn't in your manuals because she helped invent it. That helicopter, her team. You didn't witness a rescue, Cadet Evans. You witnessed a professional correcting your mistake." He looked up, eyes sharp enough to cut through the storm. "You stood in the presence of quiet royalty," he said, "and you saw weakness. You saw a woman, a civilian, pretty boots. What you failed to see was a legend." Then slowly, deliberately, Admiral Vance turned toward the horizon, where the Black Hawk had vanished. He raised his hand in a perfect, formal salute. For a long moment, no one breathed. When he lowered it, he said softly, "The exercise is terminated. Return to your barracks. Reflect on the difference between the noise of arrogance and the silence of competence." Evans didn't move. He couldn't. The words buried themselves somewhere deep. That night he would replay the sound of the rope snapping, the rain, her voice, that impossible descent. He would hear her silence louder than any order he'd ever given. And though he didn't yet know it, this was the day everything he believed about leadership would begin to break apart, so something better could take its place. Because sometimes the storm doesn't destroy, it cleanses. How do you face someone who dismantled your world without saying a single word? The rain had stopped by morning, but the mud remained thick and stubborn like guilt. The cadets moved in silence through the academy courtyard, their boots squelching against wet stone. No one spoke of the ravine. No one had to. The story had already begun to spread, not through official channels, but through whispers, half-believed retellings, and the kind of reverence usually reserved for myth. Marcus Evans heard them. He heard the murmurs that began when he entered a room, the way conversation dropped an octave. He heard his own name paired with one word failed, and he heard hers Reed, spoken softly like a ghost story. That night sleep came in fragments, every dream looping back to the same moment. The snap of the anchor, the scream, and the image of her descending into chaos as if gravity were an old friend. When he reported to Admiral Vance's office the next morning, he stood outside for a full minute before knocking. The hallway smelled of coffee and ozone. He straightened his uniform, tried to quiet the tremor in his hand, and entered. Vance didn't look up at first. His desk was bare except for a folder after-action report, Gauntlet exercise. The paper was still damp at the edges, as if even the rain wanted to witness what was written inside. "Sit down, cadet." Evans obeyed. The Admiral's tone was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You froze," Vance said simply. "Your team lost cohesion. Your leadership collapsed in under 30 seconds. Tell me why." Evans opened his mouth, but the truth jammed in his throat. "Because I was scared. Because I thought I knew everything. Because I couldn't see her." Instead, he said what training had taught him. "Sir, I misjudged the risk parameters." Vance cut him off with a raised hand. "You misjudged people, cadet. The rope failed because the anchor was placed wrong. But the real failure began before that, when you decided who was worth listening to." The Admiral's words hung heavy, measured, and deliberate. "I could expel you. I won't. You're going to learn something instead." Evans swallowed hard. "Sir." "You're being reassigned," Vance said. "Effective immediately. You'll serve as liaison to Ms. Reed while she completes her evaluation of the Academy's field protocols. You'll carry her gear. You'll facilitate her access. You'll observe. And you'll keep your mouth shut." Evans felt the words like a blow. "Sir, with respect." "With respect," Vance interrupted. "You don't get to use that word until you understand it." He closed the folder. Dismissed. The walk from the administration building to the gear depot felt endless. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, its warmth almost mocking. Around him, cadets trained, shouted, ran drills, but every voice sounded distant. He reached the depot door, took a breath, and stepped inside. The smell of oiled metal, rope fibers, and damp nylon hit him immediately. Anna Reed was there, standing at a long wooden table covered in climbing gear. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands bare. She was running a rope through her fingers slowly, feeling its core. Evans froze in the doorway. For a full 10 seconds he couldn't make himself speak. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "Ma'am," he said finally, voice too formal, too tight. "Cadet Evans reporting as ordered." Her eyes lifted, gray and unreadable. For a moment he saw nothing there, no judgment, no recognition, just the steady focus of someone who had seen too much to waste emotion. "The Corps shot on this one," she said, holding up the rope. Her tone was technical, not conversational. She coiled it and dropped it into a discard bin. "Should have been retired 100 hours ago." He nodded automatically, unsure what to do with his hands. "Your primary piton," she said after a pause. "You placed it in shale." "Yes, ma'am," he murmured. "Shale flakes under tensile load." She pointed toward a crate of rock samples on the table. "There was granite 10 feet to your left. You didn't see it." Evans felt the flush of shame rise in his neck. "I see that now." "Good." She turned back to the gear. "Seeing is the first step." No lecture, no anger, just that. For the next hour he watched her work, inspecting ropes, cleaning carabiners, organizing equipment with surgical precision. She moved without wasted motion, every gesture quiet but efficient. The silence wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, a language of its own. He realized something. She didn't fidget, didn't fill the air with small talk. She didn't need to. Her presence was the conversation. Over the following days, Evans shadowed her through every section of the academy. He carried her pack, heavier than he expected, and trailed behind as she observed training sessions, obstacle courses, weapons qualifications. She rarely spoke. When she did, it was to ask a single question that cut straight to the flaw. "Why is your medic bag organized like a rucksack? Why are you teaching students to rappel with gloves that reduce tactile feedback? Why are your safety lines visible from 200 meters?" Instructors stumbled through answers, then stopped talking altogether when she fixed that calm gaze on them. She didn't scold. She didn't argue. She just listened, the kind of listening that made people question their entire method. Evans found himself watching her the way you watch someone dismantle a clock, fascinated, uneasy, knowing that whatever gear she touched would never work the same way again. At night, he returned to his dorm and wrote, not the mandatory reports Vance demanded, but notes to himself, fragments of things he didn't yet understand. Leadership isn't noise, it's clarity under pressure. Arrogance collapses faster than rope under rain. She doesn't talk about strength, she moves through it. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It came in small moments, a correction here, a quiet observation there. One morning during a climbing drill, a freshman cadet froze halfway up a wet rock face. Reed didn't shout instructions. She simply climbed beside him, slow, deliberate, until her presence steadied him. Then she said, "Trust the hold, not the fear." Later, Evans caught himself repeating the same line to another cadet. The words didn't sound like hers yet, but they carried her rhythm, slow, even, grounded. Weeks passed. The whispers around campus changed tone. The myth of Reed became less about the rescue and more about the mystery of her calm. And Evans, once the cautionary tale, became her shadow. He started showing up early, anticipating what she'd need before she asked. When she examined ropes, he laid out the replacements. When she moved across the range, he walked half a step behind, silent, attentive. One evening, he found her sitting alone on the bleachers overlooking the obstacle field. The sunset bled red across the horizon. He hesitated before approaching. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I wanted to thank you." She didn't turn. For what? For not reporting me to the admiral, for giving me a chance to learn. There was a long silence. Then she said, "You think I did it for you?" Evans frowned. "Didn't you?" She finally looked at him, and for the first time he saw something flicker behind her eyes, a quiet sorrow, maybe even fatigue. "I did it for the next time," she said, "because next time there might not be a helicopter." The words hit harder than any reprimand. He wanted to ask more about her service, her past, how a SEAL Master Chief ended up pretending to be a civilian observer, but something about her expression stopped him. She wasn't someone who told stories. She was someone who carried them. That night Evans walked alone past the mess hall. A group of cadets fell silent as he passed. He caught a few glances, not mocking this time, but uncertain. Respectful, maybe. He didn't know what to do with it. The next morning, an anonymous photograph appeared on the main bulletin board. A still frame from the Proctor's drone footage, Anna suspended midair, one hand on Miller's harness, the storm curling around her like smoke. Someone had typed a single caption at the bottom. The difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. No one admitted to posting it. No one took it down. By evening, cadets were touching the edge of the photo before exams, before drills, a ritual born overnight. The image became more than memory. It was a mirror. Evans passed it every day. At first it hurt, a reminder of humiliation. But gradually it became something else, a standard, a measure he could aim for even if he'd never reach it. Weeks turned into a month. The mud at the ravine dried, the bridge was rebuilt, and life resumed its rhythm. But under the surface the academy had shifted. Conversations grew quieter, orders sharper, respect less performative. The instructors noticed, the admiral did too. So did Anna. One afternoon, Evans found her in a classroom, blueprint sheets spread across the table, designs for a new urban combat training facility. She looked up when he entered. "Ma'am," he began, "I've been studying the after-action report." "Yours?" "Yes," he hesitated. "There's something I don't understand. The knot you used on the oak anchor, I can't find it in any of the manuals. It looked like a tensionless hitch, but the loop." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She picked up a short length of rope and tied it in one fluid motion. The knot formed like a sculpture, elegant and functional. "It's called a Valdôtain Tresse," she said. "A modified friction hitch. French Alpine origin. We adapted it in the Hindu Kush for wet, high-angle extractions. doesn't bind under heavy load. He watched, mesmerized. The manuals give you the approved answer, she said quietly. The problem gives you the right one. Know the difference. She handed him the rope. He turned it over in his hands, the pattern intricate and precise. It wasn't just cordage, it was philosophy. That night he practiced until his fingers bled. He tied it blindfolded, one-handed in the dark. Each loop, each twist became a form of prayer, a way of asking for redemption without words. By the end of the week he could tie it perfectly, but more importantly, he understood why she'd shown him. The world didn't reward noise, it rewarded competence, and competence required humility. He started carrying that knot in his pocket, a reminder, a tether to the person he wanted to become. Sometimes, late at night, he'd see her walking across the quad, her silhouette framed by floodlights, silent as ever. She'd vanish into the armory or the training grounds, and he'd realize she wasn't haunting the academy, she was teaching it. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Because when the world has seen what you can do in silence, words become unnecessary. Why did the quiet ones always change the room the most? The academy had begun to sound different. The echo of boots in the corridors still thundered, but there was something subtler beneath it now, an undercurrent of restraint. Orders were shorter, debates slower. The air carried less bravado and more awareness, as if everyone had collectively learned to breathe before they spoke. Marcus Evans noticed it first during a morning drill. Two cadets argued about a rigging sequence. A month ago, they'd have shouted each other down. Now one of them simply said, "Check the load test," and the other nodded, recalculating. No ego, just adjustment. It was small, but small things change institutions. Anna Reed's presence lingered like the aftertaste of adrenaline, quiet but unforgettable. She still walked the grounds daily, clipboard in hand, evaluating everything from climbing knots to leadership procedures. Wherever she went, the atmosphere shifted. People straightened up, but not from fear. It was something else. A wordless respect that felt earned, not demanded. Evans followed her as always, her silent shadow. Every step beside her taught him something intangible, not tactics or technique, but rhythm. The way she paced her observation. The way she allowed silence to do what words could not. One afternoon, they stood on a high ridge overlooking a new obstacle course. Below them, cadets struggled through mud and wire, their grunts echoing across the field. Evans watched her expression, calm, distant. He wondered what she saw that no one else could. "They're doing well," he offered. "They're rehearsing," she corrected softly. He frowned. "Isn't that the point, to prepare them?" "Preparation without imagination is repetition," she said. "Out there," she nodded toward the horizon, "nothing repeats." Her words landed like small stones dropped into deep water, ripples spreading long after the sound faded. Later, as the cadets cleaned up, Reed knelt beside a coil of rope, her fingers running through it. "Do you hear that?" she asked suddenly. "Hear what?" "The silence," she said. "They're listening to themselves for the first time." Evans didn't fully understand, not yet, but he filed it away. He was getting used to learning in pieces. That night the mess hall buzzed with low conversation. Someone had drawn the knot she'd shown Evans, the Valdôtain Tresse, on the whiteboard, labeling each loop like scripture. Beside it, someone else had written "respect is a verb." No one admitted to doing it, but no one erased it either. It wasn't official doctrine, it was becoming culture. Over the next few weeks, Evans noticed something else. The younger cadets stopped bragging about who ran the fastest mile or who scored highest on marksmanship. They started talking about small things, who stayed calm under pressure, who spotted an unstable anchor first, who volunteered to carry the extra gear without being asked. Reed had shifted the definition of excellence without ever announcing it. But change doesn't come without friction. Some instructors resisted it quietly, uncomfortable with how one unranked consultant could alter the academy's DNA. A few whispered that her methods were too subtle, too soft. Others argued that humility had no place in a warfighter's toolkit. Reed never addressed them, she just kept working. Evans, however, heard the whispers, and it stirred something protective in him. He wanted to defend her to prove that what she taught mattered, but he knew she wouldn't want that. She didn't need defenders, she needed witnesses. So he watched closer, listened deeper, learned harder. One evening, she gathered a small group of instructors for a field demonstration. Evans stood behind her as she clipped into a rope line and leaned backward over the ravine, Reed's Ravine, as it was now quietly called. The name had stuck. "This is a tension test," she said. "Not for the rope, for the mind." The wind picked up, whistling through the trees. She let the line take her weight, then began descending slowly, smoothly, her voice steady. "When you're suspended between safety and failure, you learn who you are," she continued. "The rope doesn't care about rank. Gravity doesn't salute you. The only thing that matters is competence." Her boots touched down lightly at the base. The instructors watched in silence, some visibly shaken. Evans felt the words etch themselves into his chest. Later, as they walked back to camp, she said quietly, "Fear isn't the enemy, cadet. Vanity is. Fear tells you where the edge is. Vanity makes you forget there's an edge at all." Evans nodded slowly. "Did you ever forget?" She looked ahead, eyes scanning the horizon. "Once," she said, "and someone else paid for it." He didn't ask who. The pause that followed was too heavy to fill. That night she didn't eat in the mess. Evans found her alone in the hangar, cleaning her gear. The lights cast her shadow long and thin against the wall. He hesitated before stepping closer. "You knew the helicopter would come that day," he said quietly. Her hands didn't stop moving. "It's never a question of if they'll come," she said. "It's whether you can hold until they do." Her tone was flat, but her eyes betrayed something, the faintest flicker of memory, maybe regret. "You've done that before," he said. She looked up then. Her gaze pinned him in place. "Everyone who's been in the field has done that before," she said. "The difference is how many times you walk back." He wanted to ask what she meant, but her attention had already returned to the rope in her hands. She coiled it with precision, the same way a surgeon resets tools after surgery, methodical, reverent, necessary. For the first time, Evans saw beyond the myth. He saw the cost, the exhaustion in her shoulders, the way she carried the weight of competence like a scar she'd learned to ignore. He understood then, she wasn't here to impress them. She was here to make sure none of them became what she once had to be. Days turned into weeks. Her presence became routine, like gravity, invisible, constant, defining everything around it. Evans's probation slowly turned into mentorship. Vance noticed. During an evaluation meeting, the admiral leaned back in his chair and said, "You've changed, cadet. Quieter now." Evans met his eyes. "Maybe I just started listening, sir." Vance's lips curved slightly. "Then she's doing her job." After that, he wasn't assigned to follow her anymore, but he did anyway. He'd wake early and find her already on the range, checking gear, inspecting knots. Sometimes she'd run the perimeter trail before dawn, her pace steady, unhurried. He started running it too, not to keep up but to understand what drove her. He never caught her. One morning the fog hung low over the fields. Reed stood near the ravine again, staring down into the mist. Evans approached quietly. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "What?" "The field, the missions." She didn't answer right away. The wind carried the faint smell of pine and rain. "I miss the clarity," she said at last, "when everything mattered, when silence meant survival, not paperwork." He nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I miss the ones who didn't make it back." Her voice cracked almost imperceptibly. It was the first time he'd heard it falter. The sound was human, fragile. It changed how he saw her forever. That night as he walked past the bulletin board, he stopped at her photograph. The caption, "The difference between talking the talk and walking the walk," felt smaller now. It didn't capture her. Nothing could. He looked around the empty hallway and whispered, "Thank you," though she'd never hear it. The following morning she was gone. Her quarters were empty. Her clipboard lay neatly on the desk, a single folded note beneath it addressed to Admiral Vance. The only other thing left was a coil of rope, tied in the knot she'd taught him, the Valdôtain Tresse. Evan stood there, staring at it for a long time. Vance entered quietly behind him. "She completed her evaluation," he said. "Her contract ended today." "Will she come back?" Evans asked. The Admiral looked at him, expression unreadable. "People like her don't come back, son. They just move on to wherever competence is needed." He picked up the note and read it silently. Then he handed it to Evans. It was short, handwritten in small, precise letters. "Admiral, they're learning. They just needed to see it done once without noise. Respectfully, A.R." Evans folded the paper carefully, as if it might tear under breath. For days afterward, the academy felt hollow. The cadets trained, ate, studied, but something was missing. The kind of silence that had once been comforting now felt empty. Then one morning, a new poster appeared on the bulletin board beside her photograph. It wasn't official, just a quote written in black ink. "The professional doesn't seek attention, they seek precision." Below it, someone had drawn a small symbol, a single knot, the same one she'd tied. And just like that, the silence filled again, not with absence but with presence. Evans found himself on the ravine's edge that evening, staring across the chasm. The oak tree still stood, roots deep, the anchor of 100 lessons. The wind brushed through the leaves like whispers of all she'd said without saying. He tied the knot one last time, clipped it to his harness, and leaned back over the edge. The rope tightened, holding steady. Halfway down, the world went quiet. Only his breathing and the hum of tension in the line. And somewhere in that silence, he thought he heard her voice again. "Trust the hold, not the fear." He smiled, small, quiet, real. Because now he understood. The purpose of strength wasn't to dominate, it was to protect. The purpose of silence wasn't to hide, it was to listen. And the purpose of failure wasn't punishment, it was permission to begin again better. When he reached the bottom, the last light faded over the treetops. The ravine looked peaceful now, washed clean by memory and rain. He stood there for a long time, the rope still warm in his hands, and realized something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the loudest lesson doesn't come from those who command you. It comes from the one who doesn't have to. What happens when a legend leaves, but her silence stays behind? A year had passed since the day at the ravine, since the storm, the broken bridge, and the woman who had turned failure into revelation. Yet even after 12 months, her presence was everywhere. You could feel it in the cadence of drill commands, in the measured tone of briefings, in the way cadets checked their ropes twice before calling secure. The academy had changed, not loudly, quietly, like erosion, slow, steady, unstoppable. Reed's Ravine, once a site of humiliation, had become a place of pilgrimage. Every new class of cadets visited it on their first week. The story was told differently each time, embellished here, softened there, but the lesson never changed. Competence doesn't shout. And the man who told it most often was no longer Cadet Captain Evans. He was Lieutenant Marcus Evans, now leaner, quieter, with eyes that carried the weight of someone who had learned the hard way. His reputation was complicated. Some saw him as the cautionary tale who'd turned himself around. Others saw him as the keeper of a legend that still whispered through the halls. He never corrected them. This morning the air was crisp with autumn. Fog hugged the valley below, and the ravine looked almost peaceful. Evan stood at the edge with a new group of cadets, their uniforms immaculate, their confidence fresh and untested. He let them stand in silence for a moment. The wind rustled through the oak branches, the same tree that had once held the line between life and death. "All right," he said finally, his voice calm, unhurried. "You're standing on important ground." He didn't pace, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This is where I learned the difference between command and leadership, between arrogance and competence, between talking and doing." The cadets shifted slightly, eyes fixed on him. "A year ago I stood right here," he continued, "and I thought I knew everything. I had rank, authority, and confidence, but what I didn't have was humility. When the anchor failed and one of my men fell, I froze. And the only reason we're not standing here remembering a tragedy is because someone else didn't." He let the silence linger. "Her name was Anna Reed," he said softly. "You've heard the stories, they don't do her justice." A murmur passed through the line. They had all heard of her. Everyone had. Some believed she was real, others thought she was a myth, an allegory the instructors used to teach humility. "She wasn't a story," Evans said, as if reading their minds. "She was a Master Chief in the U.S. Navy, DEVGRU, SEAL Team 6. She had more combat hours than most of us have hours of sleep, but she never told anyone that. She didn't need to. Her actions were her introduction." He gestured toward the ravine. "That bridge collapsed because I placed the anchor in shale. I thought I knew the terrain. I didn't. She saw what I missed, fixed what I broke, and walked into the storm without hesitation. That day she didn't just save a life. She saved an institution from itself." He looked across their young faces, saw the mixture of awe and disbelief. "You'll all make mistakes," he said. "You'll fail at something that matters. When that happens, remember this: the professional doesn't panic. They don't posture, they act." The wind picked up, the oak leaves fluttered. "True strength," he said, "doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly like gravity, always there, always steady. You won't hear it coming, but you'll feel it when it's gone." The cadets stood in silence, not because they were told to, but because they understood that this was a moment not to fill with words. When the group finally dispersed, Evans remained behind. He walked down to the base of the ravine where moss now covered the old anchor point. He crouched beside it and brushed the dirt away, exposing the metal. It was rusted, but still there, a relic of the day he learned who he really was. He pulled a small coil of rope from his pocket, tied the same knot she had taught him, the Valdôtain Tresse, and secured it around the base. It was his quiet tribute. "Thank you," he murmured, the words carried away by the wind. Back at the academy, the culture she had inspired continued to evolve. The loud cadets found fewer audiences. The quiet ones began to rise, not because they demanded to, but because competence was suddenly visible. Instructors had changed too. They began using new terminology: situational humility, applied calm, concepts that would have sounded soft once, now spoken with respect. Reed's legacy had reshaped language itself. And yet, beneath all the reverence, there was still mystery. Who was she really? Where had she gone? Some said she'd returned to field work. Others believed she'd retired somewhere remote, living quietly near the mountains. One rumor claimed she was working with Special Operations Command on a classified rescue program. Evans never asked Vance for the truth. He didn't need to. Some people, he realized, weren't meant to be found again. They were meant to remain as lessons, like stars you navigate by but never reach. Still, sometimes at night, when the campus lights dimmed and the air smelled of rain, he'd swear he heard the faint thump of helicopter blades somewhere far beyond the hills. He never looked. He didn't want to break the spell. In the months that followed, Evans became known for his unorthodox teaching methods. He taught leadership through failure, composure through silence. His cadets didn't just learn to command, they learned to observe. During one of his first independent exercises, a young cadet named Carter misjudged a rappel anchor. Evans noticed it immediately, but instead of correcting him, he waited. The line slipped slightly, and Carter froze halfway down the wall. The other cadets panicked, shouting instructions. Evans raised his hand, quiet. The silence fell instantly. Then he spoke, his tone even. "Breathe, Carter, look at your system. What do you see?" The cadet looked down, trembling. "Sir, I didn't double back the tail." "Then fix it." The boy hesitated. "Sir, I—" Evans didn't move. "You can. Trust the hold, not the fear." The words hit him midair. Carter adjusted the rope, secured the tail, and continued down safely. When his boots touched the ground, he looked up, face pale but steady. Evans gave him a single nod, the same kind Anna had once given him. Later, the cadets whispered about the moment. He didn't yell, didn't even move, just made him fix it. One of them added quietly, "That's the Reed way." It wasn't an official term, but it stuck. By winter, the academy had a new rhythm. The legend of Anna Reed was no longer just a story. It was policy, culture, belief. And Evans, unknowingly, had become its guardian. He sometimes wondered what she'd think if she saw this, the cadets tying her knot, quoting her words, treating silence as doctrine. He suspected she'd hate it. She never wanted to be a legend. She wanted to be effective. But legends have a way of finding people who try the hardest to avoid them. One night he sat alone in the classroom reviewing evaluations. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and the storm reminded him of that day a year ago. He rubbed his eyes and leaned back in the chair. His gaze drifted to the far wall, where a single framed photograph hung, the same one that had appeared on the bulletin board months ago. It showed her suspended midair, calm in chaos. Beneath it, the caption still read, "The difference between talking the talk and walking the walk." But below the frame, someone had added another line in small block letters. "She taught us to listen." He didn't know who had written it. Maybe no one did. He sat there a long time, listening to the storm outside. And for the first time, he didn't hear rain. He heard rhythm, the pulse of training drills, the steady cadence of cadets moving in unison, the hum of competence built from silence. Then the door opened softly. Admiral Vance stepped inside, his presence still commanding even in old age. "Couldn't sleep either, Lieutenant?" he asked. Evans smiled faintly. "No, sir." Vance joined him by the window. They stood side by side watching the rain. For a while, neither spoke. "She'd be proud," Vance said finally. "Of what?" "Of this, of you." Evans shook his head. "I don't know about that, sir. I still froze, I still failed." The Admiral looked at him. "Then you learned. That's what she came here to teach. Not how to never fail, but how to fail without losing integrity." He paused, then added softly, "You know, she turned down 3 offers to teach full-time here. Said the walls were too loud." Evans chuckled under his breath. "Sounds like her." Vance smiled faintly. "She was right, though. We needed her silence to hear ourselves again." He turned to leave but stopped at the door. "Keep the story alive, Marcus, but don't worship it, teach it." Evans nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." When Vance was gone, the lieutenant sat back down, staring at the rain-slicked glass. The world outside blurred into shades of gray, sky, water, reflection. Somewhere beyond that horizon, she was out there, probably walking through another storm, calm as ever. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small rope coil, fingers tracing the familiar pattern. The knot felt different now, less like memory, more like inheritance. He tied it once more and placed it on his desk. The next morning, cadets arrived for training. Evans stood before them, the knot in his hand. "Today," he said, "you'll learn more than rope work. You'll learn trust not in command but in yourselves." He tied the knot slowly, deliberately, letting them watch. "This is the Valdôtain Tresse. You'll find it nowhere in your manuals, but you'll find its principle in every real fight you'll ever face." A cadet raised her hand. "Sir, what principle is that?" Evans looked at her, saw the spark of curiosity that once got him in trouble, and smiled. "That the manual gives you the approved answer," he said. "The problem gives you the right one." Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly across the hills. And for a brief moment, just before the wind shifted, he could have sworn he heard the echo of helicopter blades again. He smiled to himself, adjusted the rope in his hands, and began to teach. Because legends may disappear into the clouds, but their lessons, if true, never leave the ground. How far can silence echo before someone finally answers it? It started as a phrase written in chalk on a classroom board: "Trust the hold, not the fear." Within months, it had spread far beyond the academy walls. The instructors began using it in their evaluations. The cadets repeated it in training exercises, tattooed it into memory. By the end of the year, the phrase appeared on briefing slides at Ranger School, in notes from special tactics units, even whispered by pilots in pre-flight rituals before difficult missions. No one knew where it had come from, not officially. The phrase had no citation, no signature, but those who knew, the ones who'd stood at Reed's Ravine or learned under Lieutenant Evans, recognized it instantly. It was hers. The quiet lesson of one woman had begun to move through the armed forces like an underground current, invisible, constant, shaping from beneath. At the academy, Evans's reputation had grown quietly. His cadets graduated into combat units, taking her philosophy with them. They called it the Reed method, though no manual listed it. It wasn't a curriculum. It was a way of seeing. Observe first, speak second, act precisely. Those three tenets had begun, replacing the louder doctrines of old. Evans never claimed credit. He didn't even correct the name when someone called it his teaching. He'd just say, "It started before me." And when they asked where, he'd nod toward the horizon, toward the ravine. But something inside him never stopped wondering. Where was she now? Every so often, when the wind shifted across the training field, he'd swear he could smell that same metallic tang of rain that had hung in the air the day she descended the cliff. And with it came the same question: had she really left? Or was she still out there, doing what she'd always done, fixing things quietly before anyone else noticed they were broken? The answer came on a gray morning in early spring. Evans was running a leadership simulation when an unmarked SUV rolled to a stop near the field. Two men stepped out, both in plain clothes, both carrying themselves with that unmistakable stillness of operators. They didn't look around. They looked for someone. "Lieutenant Marcus Evans," one asked. "Yes." "Admiral Vance requests your presence, immediately." Evans felt the old pulse of nerves tighten in his chest. He hadn't been summoned like that since the day of the ravine. The drive to the command annex was silent. The men didn't explain, and he didn't ask. When they arrived, he was led down a dim hallway to a small conference room. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss. Admiral Vance sat at the far end of the table, sleeves rolled, a tablet open in front of him. The years had deepened the lines in his face, but his eyes were still sharp, glacial blue. "Lieutenant," he said, gesturing for Evans to sit. Evans obeyed. "I've read your recent evaluations," Vance said. "Your cadets are outperforming the standard. Your program's being noticed." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me, thank her." Evans's chest tightened slightly at the word. Vance turned the tablet toward him. On the screen was a grainy still frame, night vision, green-hued, time-stamped just 2 weeks ago. It showed a figure rappelling down a cliff face under heavy wind, two silhouettes suspended beneath. Even in infrared, Evans recognized the movement, the poise, the balance. It was her. "She's alive," he murmured. Vance nodded slowly. Alive and still working. The photo was taken in northern Pakistan. Humanitarian rescue, technically, though the people she extracted weren't exactly aid workers. Evans stared at the image. "Why show me this?" "Because I want you to understand what legacy looks like when it refuses to die," Vance said. "She trained others. They're operating off-grid now. A ghost unit, small, specialized, built on her philosophy. No insignia, no rank, just competence. He paused. We're calling them Valkyrie teams. Evans exhaled slowly, the name hitting him like thunder wrapped in silence. She's leading them, he asked. Vance's expression softened something rare. Leading? No, she doesn't lead, she guides, she observes. And when everything else fails, she steps in, same as always. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Evans said, "Is she coming back?" Vance shook his head. She was never meant to stay. People like her, they don't belong to institutions. They belong to necessity. The Admiral leaned back, but she wanted you to see this. Evans frowned. How could she? Vance slid a sealed envelope across the table. It arrived yesterday. No return address. No digital trace. Hand-delivered through channels I don't ask questions about anymore. Evans opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, the same ravine taken from above. The oak tree visible, the rebuilt bridge spanning across in perfect tension. On the back, in her compact handwriting, were 4 words. "Still holding, are you?" Evans felt his throat tighten. For a long moment he couldn't speak. Vance stood, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. "She hasn't forgotten, Lieutenant. Neither should you." When Evans left the building, the sky had begun to clear. Sunlight cut through the clouds like quiet vindication. He folded the photo carefully, slipped it into his pocket, and walked across the parade grounds. That evening he returned to the ravine. The wind was soft now, carrying the smell of pine and water. The bridge looked stronger than ever, rebuilt, reinforced, a monument of competence and humility. He stood at the edge, watching it sway slightly in the breeze. "You're still holding," he whispered. He didn't know if he was speaking to the bridge or to her. Maybe both. News of the Valkyrie team spread in classified circles, never officially acknowledged, but impossible to ignore. Units operating under impossible conditions, extracting civilians from war zones, dismantling human trafficking rings, executing rescues no one claimed credit for. Every after-action report shared one constant detail: precision without noise. They'd move in silence, complete the objective, and vanish. Local commanders found their footprints, sometimes their ropes, never their names. And whenever a debrief officer asked who had authorized the operation, the answer was always the same: no one. It was already done. Evans began receiving quiet messages from graduates, short, encrypted, unsigned. One read, "Tied, you're not under fire, held." Another applied the Reed method, "still breathing." He saved every one of them. Sometimes he'd sit in his office late at night, reading them by the dim light of his desk lamp. Each message felt like another voice in a growing choir of quiet professionals. They weren't shouting their achievements. They were just doing their jobs perfectly. That was her real victory. Not the rescue at the ravine, not the salute from the Admiral, but this, a generation learning to move through chaos with grace, to treat silence not as weakness but as discipline. One summer evening, as Evans walked the perimeter trail, he saw a lone figure standing by the tree line. The sun was sinking, painting the horizon in orange fire. For a second his heart stuttered. The posture, the stance. He slowed his pace. The figure turned slightly, not her. Just a young woman in civilian clothes, camera in hand, sketching the landscape. But she smiled when she saw him. "You're Lieutenant Evans, right?" He nodded, cautious. "Have we met?" "No," she said, "but my mother trained under Anna Reed. She told me to come see the place." He blinked. "Your mother?" The woman nodded. "Captain Sophia Hart. She said this is where everything changed." Evans felt something twist inside his chest, pride mixed with awe. "Your mother's one of the Valkyries." The woman smiled faintly. She's stateside now. But she said to tell you." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it to him. "She said to give you this." Evans opened it carefully. Inside was a scrap of rope, weathered, frayed at the ends, tied in the same knot. The Valdôtain Tresse. He stared at it, speechless. "She said it's been through hell," the woman added softly, "but it held." Evans looked up at the horizon, eyes burning. "It always does." Months passed. The military officially denied the existence of any Valkyrie teams, but rumors persisted. They said an unmarked helicopter had been spotted in Syria, another in the Hindu Kush, another off the Horn of Africa. Always black, always silent, always gone before dawn. The stories reached Evans's cadets. They whispered about it in the barracks that somewhere out there, Master Chief Anna Reed still moved through the dark, saving people no one would admit needed saving. Evans never confirmed it. He'd just smile faintly when they asked and say, "Some ghosts never stop working." And then, one night, he received a message through a secure line he hadn't used in years. No sender ID, no encryption key, just a line of text. "Training over, Marcus. They're ready now." He read it twice, his pulse steadying. Then he closed the terminal and looked out the window. Rain had started again, light, steady, familiar. The kind of rain that brought memory with it. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closing. The sound of it carried him back to the ravine, the rope, the storm, the woman who had shown him that silence could lead louder than any voice. He thought about the cadets out there now, the officers, the unseen Valkyries, all of them shaped by a moment that lasted less than 10 minutes, a moment that had rewritten an entire culture. And he realized something. Legacy wasn't built by the loud. It was built by those who did their work so precisely that others carried it forward without even realizing whose hands had shaped it first. He opened his eyes and whispered the words he had once heard her say, his voice steady in the quiet room. "Fear isn't the enemy, vanity is." Then he smiled. Because somewhere out there, maybe high above another nameless ravine, another quiet professional was walking down a cliff, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to look for her. He already knew she was there. Still holding, still teaching, still silent. Why do some voices echo even when the world around them is burning? The dust hadn't settled for 3 days. The wind carried it from the hills, a constant, whispering haze that turned every breath into grit. From the outside, the village looked abandoned. But through the thermal scope, the world was alive with movement. Shadows in windows, heat signatures clustered in walls that looked empty to the naked eye. Sergeant Nora Hayes adjusted her headset, her voice calm. "Valkyrie 4 in position." Static answered her for a beat, then a soft click. One tone, the all clear, no words. They didn't use names or ranks in the field, just numbers. The less said, the longer you lived. Hayes exhaled slowly. Her heart was steady, her hands still. She checked her line, the rope anchored to the old radio tower that leaned precariously over the ravine. Her objective was simple: infiltration, extraction, exfil. The local militia had taken a UN medic hostage. They had 40 minutes before the next patrol swept through. Her partner, Valkyrie 3, crouched beside her, a wiry man with eyes that never blinked twice. He looked at her, questioning. "Wind's picking up," he murmured. "Trust the hold," she said. He gave a faint smile. They all knew where that phrase came from. When they descended into the gorge, the world narrowed to breathing, rope tension, and the rhythm of muscle memory. Each hand movement measured, each foothold deliberate. The sound of the rope sliding through her gloves reminded her of something she'd heard years ago, a voice calm in chaos, teaching without preaching. "Fear tells you where the edge is. Vanity makes you forget it." Anna Reed's voice, always there like a compass needle inside her skull. Hayes had never met her directly. She was a ghost story passed down through training halls, an uncredited doctrine that every operative somehow learned to quote. But Hayes had once trained under Captain Sophia Hart, one of Reed's last students. And through Hart, She'd inherited not just the knot, but the mindset. Move like water, think like still air. She landed softly at the base of the ravine. Ahead, the path wound toward the village outskirts. Through the scope, she could see flickers of movement, sentries, two on rotation, one distracted by a cigarette. Hayes signaled silently, two fingers sweep motion. Valkyrie 3 nodded, they split. No comms, no noise. She advanced, steps timed between gusts of wind. Her body moved with a calm that didn't feel like bravery, more like focus so deep that fear didn't have room to exist. When she reached the wall, she pressed her palm against it, the texture of dust and decay grounding her. She peeked around the corner. The hostage was there, bound to a metal chair under a broken roof beam. Two guards, both armed, inattentive. Hayes waited for the rhythm. The one Reed had described in the recording's heart once showed her. Every chaos has cadence. Find it, then move between its beats. She counted the breaths of the nearest guard, 4 in, 2 out, hesitation on the 5th. That was her window. In 3 heartbeats she was inside. The first guard dropped before the second even turned. The second raised his weapon, but Hayes's motion was already a memory, one precise strike, no wasted movement. Silence again. Valkyrie 3 appeared in the doorway, eyes scanning. Clear. Clear, she whispered. They cut the medic loose. His face was pale, dehydrated. He tried to speak, but Hayes shook her head. No words, just breathe. The extraction route was up the east side, a steeper climb but shielded by the ridgeline. They moved fast. The medic stumbled once, and Hayes caught him with one arm, pulling him upright without breaking stride. At the halfway point, gunfire erupted below. A sentry had found the bodies. 3 go, she ordered. He hesitated. You. I'll hold the line. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded, dragging the medic upward. Hayes turned back, scanning for movement. Shadows flickered between buildings. Muzzle flashes. She ducked behind a collapsed wall, breathing through her nose. Her rope was still anchored to the tower, her exit, if she could reach it. She checked her magazine. 9 rounds, enough for precision, not chaos. Her earpiece crackled once, a single tone, not from her team, from command. And then a voice. Calm, controlled, familiar. Wind shifting, Hayes, use the ridge. Hayes froze, the voice was commands. It wasn't anyone on her team. It was hers. Anna Reed. Copy, Hayes whispered, heart pounding, not from fear but recognition. She moved as instructed, veering left through the debris, scaling the ridge under cover of dust and wind. The gunfire faded behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. By the time she reached the extraction point, the helicopter was already there, lights off, blades whispering in rhythm with the wind. The pilot glanced back as she loaded the medic, cutting it close. Hayes strapped in, eyes scanning the darkness. We weren't alone down there. The pilot said nothing, but his glance toward the ridge said enough. In the last flash of lightning, just before they lifted off, Hayes saw a silhouette standing on the edge of the ravine, motionless, watching. The figure raised a hand once, a faint salute, and disappeared into the dark. No words, no trace, just silence. 3 days later, back at the forward operating base, Hayes filed her report. Standard language, minimal detail, objective complete, 0 casualties, no engagement beyond threshold. But when she reached the section titled External Support, she hesitated. There was no protocol for what she'd experienced. She looked around the empty tent, then typed 3 words. Unconfirmed field assist. And beneath it, without knowing why, she wrote, Read methodology observed. She closed the file, encrypted it, and sent it up the chain. Later that night, as the base settled into uneasy quiet, she walked outside. The desert air was cold, the stars harsh and bright. She reached into her vest and pulled out her rope, the same one she'd used in the gorge. It was frayed at the ends, streaked with dust and blood. She tied it again, the same knot, tight, deliberate, perfect. "Still holding," she whispered. 2 weeks later, Hayes was called to debrief. A colonel she didn't know waited in the room. No insignia, no nameplate, just stillness. He gestured for her to sit. "I read your report," he said. "You mentioned external assistance." "Yes, sir." "You believe it was Anna Reed?" Hayes hesitated. "I can't confirm." The colonel studied her. "But you believe?" She met his eyes. "I know what I heard." He nodded once. "That's enough." He stood, sliding a folder across the table. "You're being reassigned, Sergeant. New unit forming under special authorization. You'll receive coordinates, not a name. You'll know it when you arrive." Hayes frowned. "Sir, am I being transferred or tested?" His lips curved slightly. "With Reed, it's always both." The helicopter dropped her in the middle of nowhere, mountains stretching like bones under a pale sky. There was no visible base, no outpost, just silence. Then from behind a ridge, a figure emerged, a woman in field fatigues, rope slung over her shoulder, expression unreadable. "Hayes." "Yes." The woman nodded. "You're early." "Who are you?" "Captain Hart." Hayes blinked. "Sophia Hart." She smiled faintly. "You've heard of me. I trained under your doctrine." Hart studied her for a long moment. "Doctrine? Too formal a word for what we do. Call it habit." She gestured for Hayes to follow. They walked through the ridge pass into a hidden camp, minimalist, efficient. Small tents, stripped-down gear, operators moving with the same precise rhythm Hayes recognized from training videos she'd only half believed were real. At the far end, beneath a tarp, stood a single woman examining a map spread across a crate. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, her posture unmistakable. Hayes stopped in her tracks. Anna Reed looked up. Her eyes, sharp, calm, ancient, met hers. For a moment the world narrowed again, the sound of the wind fading until there was only breath and heartbeat. "Welcome to Valkyrie," Reed said quietly. Hayes felt the words settle inside her like gravity. "Ma'am, I." Reed raised a hand. "No ma'am, no titles here, only work." She stepped closer. "You tied the ridge under pressure." "Yes." Reed's gaze flickered to the rope on Hayes's pack. "Still holding." Hayes nodded. Reed smiled faintly, barely there. "Good." She turned back to the map. "Then let's see if we can make the world hold a little longer." That night the camp glowed faintly under the stars, firelight reflected on steel and silence. The Valkyries moved through their routines quietly, efficient, purposeful. No ranks, no slogans, just competence. Hayes sat by the fire, coiling her rope. Across from her, Reed spoke softly with Hart, their voices blending with the wind. For the first time in her life, Hayes didn't feel like she was training toward something. She felt like she'd arrived. Not at a destination, but at an understanding. The true battlefield wasn't chaos, it was noise. And silence, real, earned silence, was victory. Later, as the camp went dark, Hayes looked up at the stars. She thought of all the cadets back at the academy, the ones learning the same lessons through Evans, through whispers, through stories that had turned into oaths. She wondered if they knew the truth, that the woman who had taught their teachers was still out here, still holding the line quietly while the world slept. She smiled faintly. Because they didn't need to know. They only needed to act as if she were watching. And that, she realized, was the whole point. Sometimes legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about being repeated. Why does the past always find its way back through the cracks of silence? The mountain air was thin enough to taste the cold. Reed's breath hung in faint clouds as she crouched beside the edge of the overlook, studying the valley through her scope. Below, the ruins of an abandoned compound stretched like bones across the earth, scattered, silent, half buried under sand. Intelligence said it had been empty for years. Experience told her intelligence was usually late. Movement northeast quadrant, whispered Hart from behind her. Thermals confirm 4 heat signatures, 1 stationary, 3 packing. Reed nodded slightly, same pattern as before. They had been watching for 2 days, unseen, unmoving. Their target, a missing field medic from a NATO team captured 6 weeks ago. Officially, the search had been suspended. Unofficially, Valkyrie didn't believe in expiration dates. Hayes knelt beside them, her breathing steady, eyes scanning the terrain. The young sergeant had adapted fast, too fast, Reed thought sometimes. She recognized that look, the focus of someone who wanted to prove she belonged, to earn silence instead of applause. Wind shifting, Hayes murmured. Trust the hold, Reed replied automatically. Hayes's lips twitched into a small, almost grateful smile. The phrase had outlived its creator, and sometimes Reed wondered if it had outlived its purpose too. They moved at dusk, the world fading into shades of blue and shadow. The Valkyrie team descended the slope with the precision of falling snow, silent and synchronized. Every movement deliberate, every gesture pre-agreed upon. Words were risk. Breath was discipline. The plan was simple: infiltrate, extract, exfil under cloud cover. But plans, Reed knew, had the same lifespan as confidence. They lasted right until contact. At the compound wall, Reed motioned 2 forward scouts ahead. The first climbed, scanning, then lowered a tether. Hayes was next. She climbed easily, her movements fluid. Hart followed. Reed last, always last. Inside, the air smelled of rust and gun oil. The sound of muffled laughter drifted from a nearby corridor. Guards, maybe 3, their voices slurred from fatigue. Reed gave the signal. The team moved like a single breath. The first 2 guards fell silently. The third caught mid-turn, his weapon never raised. Reed caught him before he hit the floor, easing his body down with clinical grace. Room secure, whispered Hart. They pressed deeper. Down a narrow stairwell, past a cracked wall, the air thickened with decay. The medic was there, tied to a pipe, pale, dehydrated, eyes half open. Hayes reached him first, cutting the restraints. Stay with us, she whispered. He blinked weakly. Who are you? No one, Hayes said softly. Hold on. Reed crouched beside her. The medic's pulse was shallow but present. She checked the vitals, nodded once. Stabilize and move. But before they could lift him, the compound trembled, a deep, echoing boom. Hart's voice came sharp. Contact west perimeter, they're back early. Reed's jaw tightened. Extraction route. Blocked. She exhaled slowly. Then we make a new one. They moved up, guiding the medic carefully through the corridors. The sound of footsteps grew louder above them, the unmistakable rhythm of boots, the chaos of numbers. Hayes pressed against the wall, scanning the corner. We're pinned. Reed looked at the cracked ceiling. Not yet. She drew a small charge from her pack, thermite, low yield. She placed it against the wall, set the timer to 3 seconds, and nodded. On my mark, she whispered. Go quiet, go clean. The explosion was soft, controlled, a bloom of white fire cutting through concrete like breath through glass. They emerged into the outer corridor, the cold night air rushing in. But the sound had drawn attention. Shouts echoed. Flashlights flickered across the walls. North Tower, Hart hissed. They're flanking. Reed's eyes swept the terrain. The tower's silhouette loomed above, a single rope anchored to a rusted beam. The same kind of rope, the same kind of risk. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in the present anymore. She was back at the ravine, rain slicing through fog, cadets screaming, a bridge collapsing beneath their feet. Chief, Hayes's voice snapped her back. Reed steadied her breath. We hold the ridge. Hayes, take the medic. Hart, cover, I'll anchor. Negative, Hart protested. You're exposed. Exactly, Reed said quietly. That's why it'll work. Before they could argue, she was already moving, sprinting across the courtyard under moonlight. Bullets cracked the air around her, snapping through dust. She didn't flinch. Every step measured, every pivot precise. She reached the tower, clipped her harness, tied the rope, the knot perfect, muscle memory decades deep. "Anchor set," she called. Hayes and Hart appeared, dragging the medic between them. They clipped in and began the ascent. Reed covered them, her rifle calm and steady. She hit every shot with surgical precision, not anger, not adrenaline, just necessity. When the last of them cleared the edge, she turned to follow, but the line jerked violently. The beam creaked. "Chief, the anchor," Hayes's voice strained through comms. "I see it," Reed said. The metal groaned again, splitting under pressure. She could have unclipped, saved herself, but Hayes and the medic were still on the rope. Reed pressed her gloved hand against the knot, feeling the strain. She could almost hear the fibers screaming. "Still holding," she whispered. Then, with her free hand, she pulled the secondary carabiner from her belt and clipped it to a support rod beside her, an improvised anchor. It held for 2 seconds, maybe 3, just long enough for Hart to pull the others over the edge. Then it gave. The rope snapped free. Reed dropped. For a moment the world was weightless. The sound of air roaring past her ears, the sky tilting, it felt like falling through memory. Then a jolt. The secondary line she had tied as backup caught on the rebar below, wrenching her midair. Pain shot through her side, white and blinding, but she was alive. "Chief, talk to me." "I'm fine," she lied. "Keep moving." Hart's voice cracked. "We're not leaving without you." Reed's eyes flicked to the horizon, headlights cutting through the distance. Reinforcements inbound. "You don't have time, move." "On it. Now." She cut the comm before they could answer. For a second she just hung there, suspended between sky and ground, blood dripping from her glove. The stars above were sharp, cruel, beautiful. And then faintly she heard something. A voice, not real, not now, a memory. "Fear isn't the enemy, vanity is." Her own words, thrown back from a past she could never quite escape. She gritted her teeth, reached for her harness and began climbing. Every motion a war between will and gravity. At the top the ledge was empty, her team gone, as ordered. But a small mark remained on the rock, a single knot tied into the rope waiting for her hand. She touched it and smiled faintly, still holding. By dawn they were miles away, the medic stable, the team silent. Hart patched Reed's side without a word. Hayes sat nearby, staring into the horizon. Finally she said softly, "You didn't have to stay behind." Reed's tone was even. "Someone always has to." Hayes shook her head. "You talk like you're already gone." Reed looked at her, eyes calm. "If I've done my job right, I already am." Hart glanced over. "That's not how legacy works, Chief." Reed smirked. "It's exactly how it works." She leaned back against the rock, wincing slightly. The wound wasn't fatal, but it would slow her down. She didn't mind. Slowing down wasn't failure, it was reflection. The others drifted off to rest, leaving her alone with the sunrise. The sky bled from violet to gold, and for a moment everything was still. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded photograph, the one she'd taken years ago of the ravine bridge rebuilt. On the back, in fading ink, were her own words, still holding, "Are you?" She turned it over and traced the handwriting with her thumb. It wasn't a question anymore, it was an answer. That night, under a blanket of stars, the Valkyries gathered around the fire. Reed spoke quietly, her voice low, even. "You all know why we exist," she began. "Because the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more precision. We move without recognition, without ego. We fail quietly and succeed the same way. But don't mistake silence for absence." Her gaze moved from face to face. "Every knot you tie, every hand you steady, every life you keep from slipping, that's legacy. Not medals, not names on walls. She paused, then added softly, "If they never remember us good, that means we did it right." Hayes looked at her not as a recruit anymore, but as something closer to kin. "And when you're gone, Chief, what then?" Reed smiled faintly. "Then someone else will tie the line." The wind shifted, brushing the firelight across her face, the scars, the calm, the quiet power that seemed older than the war itself. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Hayes reached down, pulled her rope from her pack, and tied the Valdôtain Tresse. Tight, clean, perfect. Reed's eyes flicked to it, approving, "Still holding?" Hayes nodded, "Always." Reed leaned back, eyes drifting toward the horizon where the stars met the edge of darkness. "Then maybe we all will." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with memory, respect, and the unspoken promise of those who understood what it meant to act without witness. And somewhere far away, over another nameless ridge, a faint sound rose, the low thrum of helicopter blades cutting through night air. Reed listened, smiled faintly, and closed her eyes. Because sometimes the sound of rescue wasn't meant for you. Sometimes it was proof that your silence had worked. How do you honor someone who never wanted to be remembered? It had been 6 years since the storm at the ravine. 6 years since the quiet woman with no rank had walked into the academy, taught them all to listen, and vanished again into the silence she trusted more than medals. Marcus Evans stood on the same ridge where she once stood, the morning light washing the horizon in silver. The ravine below was peaceful now. The rebuilt bridge gleamed faintly in the dawn. Beneath it, the oak tree still held strong, its roots wrapped deep into the earth, defying weather and time. He wasn't a lieutenant anymore. The insignia on his chest read commander, though he rarely used the title. He still wore the same rope bracelet around his wrist, frayed, faded, and tied in a familiar knot, the Valdôtain Tresse. Cadets gathered behind him, silent, waiting for the morning address. The Academy's annual Legacy Week had become tradition, a time to remember those who had shaped its code. Most of the names were engraved on marble walls. Hers was, by her own choice. But everyone knew. Evans didn't hold notes. He never did for this one. His voice carried the weight of something lived, not rehearsed. 6 years ago, he began, a storm changed this place. We lost a bridge, and for a moment we nearly lost ourselves. But we gained something that day that no structure could ever replace. The cadet stood still, listening. We learned that leadership isn't about being seen, it's about being steady. We learned that courage isn't noise, it's patience. And that respect isn't given by rank, it's earned by restraint. He paused, looking down at the ravine. We were saved that day by someone whose name most of you will never find in your history books. She didn't want that. She believed that real professionalism leaves no signature, just results. He looked back at them, his eyes calm. We owe her a bridge, not made of steel but of conduct. Every time you hold your silence when ego tempts you to speak, that's her bridge. Every time you act precisely when chaos demands noise, that's her bridge. The wind picked up, fluttering the flags behind him. He raised his wrist slightly, showing the rope knot. And when you tie one of these, remember what it means. It's not decoration, it's commitment. To hold steady, even when the world feels like it's falling. He looked down at the ravine again, the sunlight catching in his eyes. Because somewhere out there, someone taught us how. Silence followed, not heavy, not mournful, peaceful, the kind of silence she would have approved of. After the ceremony, Evans walked alone toward his office. He preferred solitude these days. Words had begun to feel like currency he didn't want to spend. On his desk sat a single envelope, unmarked, sealed, resting on top of a small package. He frowned. The handwriting was familiar, precise. He opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, the same kind she'd once sent him years ago. A barren mountain, a narrow ridge and a small fire glowing faintly in the dark, and beneath it, 4 words written in faded ink. Still holding, now yours. His breath caught for a moment. He opened the package next. Inside lay a coil of rope, weathered, sun-bleached and cut short at one end. The fibers were burned slightly, as if from friction. It was hers. He sat there for a long time, turning it in his hands. It felt heavier than it should have. Then he noticed something else. Beneath the rope, folded in half, was a mission brief, declassified, minimal, barely a page long. The heading read, Operation Wintergate Final Extract, Valkyrie Unit Unmarked. No details, no coordinates, just a short summary. Objective, civilians extracted under hostile fire. Casualties, 1 operator confirmed missing, presumed KIA. Recovery team found personal effects at site, anchor rope intact, line held. Evans set the paper down. His hand tightened around the rope until his knuckles turned white. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just sat in the silence she'd taught him to value, the same silence she had lived and died by. When he finally looked up, his eyes fell on the academy crest hanging above his desk. Beneath it, a plaque had been added since his command, one that he had personally approved. No name. Just a single engraved line. Precision without noise. He smiled faintly. It was enough. That night Evans walked out to the ravine alone. The moon hung low, and the world was painted in silver and shadow. He reached the edge and sat down, legs dangling over the same spot where it had all begun. He uncoiled the rope and tied it one last time, slowly, methodically. Each loop a memory, each pull a heartbeat. The knot was perfect, the tension balanced. He tied it to the railing and whispered softly, still holding. The wind carried the words away. He sat there for hours watching the stars. The night air was cold, but it felt right, grounding, clean. In his mind he could still hear her voice, that calm, even tone that never rose, never faltered. The kind of voice that didn't command obedience. It inspired discipline. He thought of all the people she'd touched without ever meeting. The cadets, the Valkyries, the rescued lives that would never know her name. And he realized that maybe that was the truest kind of immortality, to live on in precision, in restraint, in every quiet act done correctly when no one's looking. Because names fade. Stories blur. But conduct endures. A year later, the Academy received a letter from an anonymous sender. It contained no name, no return address, just a single photograph of a group of women standing in front of a helicopter. Faces blurred, no insignia. On the tail of the aircraft, painted small and almost hidden, was a symbol, a single rope knot. The Valdôtain Tresse. Attached was a single line of text. Valkyrie still flies. Evans smiled when he read it. He didn't forward it to command. He didn't log it as evidence. He just pinned it to the corkboard behind his desk beside the photograph of the rebuilt bridge. Some things, he thought, were never meant to be filed. Months later, a storm rolled through the mountains. The sky split open with rain and thunder, the kind that makes the world feel raw and alive. Evans walked through it without an umbrella, boots crunching against wet gravel until he reached the bridge. The ravine roared below, the river thrashing against stone. He leaned against the rail and watched it, the same place, the same noise, the same silence between crashes. And then faintly, through the wind and the rain, he thought he heard it, a sound so subtle he almost doubted it. Helicopter blades. Far away. He didn't look up, he didn't need to. He just closed his eyes, smiled, and whispered, still holding. Because he knew. Somewhere in some storm, someone was tying another rope. And maybe that's all legacy ever is. The quiet handoff between those who act without applause and those who learn without asking. He turned to leave, rain dripping from his hair, his uniform dark with water. As he walked away, his voice, steady, soft, deliberate, carried through the storm, as if speaking not to the world but to the one who had once saved it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The wind swallowed the words whole, scattering them across the mountains like seeds. And as dawn broke through the rain, the light caught on the knot he had tied, shining faintly, perfectly, against the soaked rope that refused to break. Still holding, always holding.